Hello there. My name is Wagbroski, and I'd like to finally discuss a homebound animated film that was a subject of my interest for the past few months. It's none other than Space Cadet, a dialogue-free Canadian film based on the 2011 graphic novel. It was the third film I saw at the 50th Toronto International Film Festival. I also rewatched it during the 2025 Toronto Relation Film Festival, and again during its wider theatrical opening. Space Cadet is a relatively simple film. It follows the life of an astronaut exploring the vast planets of a distant planetary system, while her surrogate robot guardian discovers more of his life outside of her presence. The film ultimately finds itself as quite a sentimental familial tale with a luminous visual palette and admirable human hand. The film leaves a lasting impact for all audiences and incorporates a clever symbolism that could be easily understood. A debut feature, Space Cadet bravely tackles numerous topics relating to familial connection and the cycle of life, though does hold back from telling an emotionally nuanced and properly paced work to be memorable. The two protagonists are so charismatic and distinct, and you can see many aspects of yourself in each. The art style is astutely polygonal and cute. The film tells its story within a simple, technologically enhanced world not too far from our own future, and also visualizes an imaginative and alien planetary system. At the top of its game, Space Cadet heralds a vibrant colourscript and an intricately abstract combination of traditional and ambient soundtrack that remain front and center. It's an endearing animated effort that is certainly worth a watch with your family, and I definitely hope it has a wider release. Space Cadet was directed by the novel's original illustrator and author, Koala. That's right, the man himself! I was able to exchange a few words with him and the rest of the artistic team after both of my initial screenings, and I learned so much from talking to the creatives firsthand. The producers also gave out these small postcards with scenes from the film. They were so cute! Space Cadet is Kid Koala's first feature film presentation, but not his first multimedia project. He's embarked on doing some live puppet shows before, which gave him further experience as a creative director for a timed medium. Nephonia Must Fall looks absolutely splendid. I wish I watched it, or his other show, the story film Mosquito. Back in August when I was looking for the animated films to be shown at TIFT, I was incredibly gravitated towards this one, particularly because of its ideation and visual style. When I first read the festival synopsis, I was drawn to this idea of this guardian robot representing a close parental figure, and was curious as to how the creative team would commit to this concept. I thought back to The Wild Robot, a film I saw the year before and heralded for its own thorough execution. Space Cadet was also inherently averse to dialogue, and such was the gorgeous, balanced animated film flow, so I wondered how they were going to handle that aspect as well. Out of the three films I was planning to watch at TIFT, Space Cadet was the film I was most excited to watch, and the one that had the most captivating cover image. Ironic as it ended up being, I wasn't originally planning on seeing another film at the lineup for that same reason, being Little Emily or the character of Rain, and you already know how I ended up feeling about that one. Back to Space Cadet. I wasn't the only one heavily interested in seeing it. When I purchased my ticket, I had actually taken the last seat available on the listing. After the festival came to a close, I still find it very amusing that Little Emily had ended up my favorite film at the lineup, and for Space Cadet to wind up a bit of an afterthought after that hectic week. Space Cadet is an all-Canadian production. Additional storyboards were provided by a team from Seneca Polytechnic. Seneca and head of story Lillian Chan are based in Uptown Toronto, and the film's producer Jeanette Petit, 3D modeler Gilles Renault, CG animation studio Singing Frog, and Kid Koala himself are based in Montreal. As a Canadian creative artist, I revere this production the more I find out about it. It's admirable to hear that an accomplished piece of work was produced so close to me, and that the opportunities to work on one were not too far. This film was an undoubtable passion project, and a great leap of faith compared to Kid Koala's other musical works. I can't state enough just how happy I was to have seen it in theaters. Animated productions solely based in Canada don't come by all that often. Whenever they do, I think that they're always worth checking out. It's so inspiring to hear how the creative team rebuilt and adapted this project from the ground up, focusing on the story's best elements and suiting it for a cinematic lifeform. What I was most surprised by was how long it took the producers to get this film in motion and funded, as this was a film produced by a small studio. After the 2011 graphic novel became optioned for a film in the same year, it took around 10 years to reach sufficient funding amongst numerous organizations. After the pre-production and CG revitalization in 2015, the film was entirely produced from 2021 to early 2025. All in all, it took around 14 years for the film to lift off. The creative team had some incredible patience seeing the project come together from its barest roots. Sparse throughout 2025, the film was screened at many film festivals, including those in Berlin, Annecy, Hong Kong, Busan, and Toronto. Right now, the film is being distributed further in Quebec and Ontario, and in Sweden, Germany, and France as well, and the audiences in attendance were very receptive to the film. I'm honestly stunned that the film isn't heading to digital on demand anytime soon. Kid Koala says the team is hoping for at least 2031 when a distributor could be found, and 5 years feels too criminal of a wait. It's to the fault of no one, and I'm sure the distribution pipeline is far more complex than my understanding, but I know that many global audiences would love to see the film, especially when it's already been completed for a year. I just want the film to truly reach further audiences when the iron's still hot. In the larger picture, Space Cadet is a heartwarming film which memorializes the familial bonds that last on a person. Through its central protagonists and unfolding dual narratives, the film harks on the cycle of life through a uniquely futuristic, technological point of view. As a collective work, Space Cadet accomplishes its narrative beats with a very sentimental and reflective flair that humanizes its message and emphasizes how personal it is. Kid Koala conceptualized the original Space Cadet novel upon the passing of his grandmother. At the same time, he was expecting the arrival of his first daughter, which inspired this project. I felt that personal influence throughout the film's narrative. For the bulk of this film, Space Cadet is split between the two characters of Céleste the Cadet and her parental guardian bot. It resembled a narrative style similar to the Mario Bros. Or Frozen movies and definitely balanced more cohesion and balance than the former. Céleste Estrella is the titular Space Cadet and my personal favorite character in the film. Throughout the runtime, she is so charismatic, memorable, and just plain awesome. On top of that, her casual character antics are quite charming. Her bubbly character animation and cute facial expressions bring her to life, the little vocal clips and onomatopoeia as well. She consistently incorporates an energy of whimsical fun in any one of her scenes and is superbly animated. In the luminous planetary system, she finds this camaraderie in the sentient plants that she studies and engages with them like pets. There's a literal humor in the physicality of the situation that made me chuckle. Céleste has a very acute memory and uses everything she's learned in her life to thrust her forwards, which made for some interesting pairings with Guardian Bot's flashback imagery to connect the film's narrative. These physical objects within her childhood memories symbolize her core interests and characteristics, and greatly influence her mission. She's lived a very simple life in her 2 decades of living. She has little possessions to her name, where it's somewhat laughable that her birthday present is a symbolic ice cream wrapper and a square of origami paper. Celeste's space trek in particular made for my favorite sequences of the film. I'm personally interested in films with space exploration within them. We see how adaptable she is with the resources she's able to access, and it's satisfying to watch her character develop. There's this completely out-of-pocket moment where she goes full-on martial arts mode trying to get one of the space jellyfish off her back, and it was so tonally unexpected from this film that I loved it so much. Like, yeah, your girl is not only a courageous graduated astronaut with a green thumb, but she could also survive in a boxing ring? Cadet doesn't even feel like a fitting term to describe her. It's a complete understatement to how capable she really is. Celeste's profession of choice as an astronaut proved a great subplot within the film. The space setting is full of foreign oddities and is infinitely outstretching. In the context of this film, it's a double meaning. It symbolizes her distance away from Guardian Bot while also being an interesting expedition to follow around with in its own right. She's distanced from her familial figure for the 6 months of her mission, a newfound entire independence. I like how her boxy spacesuit resembles Guardian Bot's figure, like the memory of his impact lives on with her. I like the touch that her helmet resembles a cubic cassette tape, reflecting a method of musical composition in the film. Celeste follows the footsteps of her mother Stella, a studious astronaut lost in the danger zone near the luminous planetary system. Uncovering unfinished research within her mother's journal, Celeste travels to the mysterious planet herself to finish the mission her mother started. I felt that was so brave and poetic. The whole family has this contagious compassion that I could really see inspiring the younger audience. However, I felt that Space Cadet had held back from fully realizing and exploring its themes of overcoming grief apart from the scenes that it briefly had. The narrative hadn't dedicated much time towards the moment Celeste lost her mother when it happened, so the beats there felt a tad overlooked. The character was very young then, so it made some sense to make haste, though it was a bit unclear. It took me a rewatch to fully piece together the film's chronology past this moment and what it mattered to Celeste. The first-generation Guardian bot, with whom Celeste had grown up, is the parental deuteragonist in Space Cadet. A poignant symbol and celebration of her aged caretakers, Guardian bot encapsulates a lighthearted and jolly spirit despite his wear and tear. The physicality of his mechanical body language form the film's strongest humor and compassionate air. Some of my favorite visual gags in the film derive from Guardian Bot's characterization, which balanced the obvious jabs of technological faults with a charming and clever presentation. Guardian Bot has a very simple character design, a Kid Koala based on the shape of a hamburger with surfaces of an aluminum dispenser. Boxy, primitive, and polygonal. All of these aspects contributed to making him appear tangible and friendly. At Tifty, I found Guardian Bot to be the most memorable robotic figure in my lineup when I compared him to the robot Mickey from Arco. The intricate sound design and Foley for Guardian Bot's movement complemented his character loads as well. Without dialogue, you'd need a more direct way to vocalize and visualize intent and simulated feeling, especially in the robotic characters as well. Guardian Bot's sound design comprised layers of servos, bleeps, whirs, and some subtle vinyl scratches recorded by Kid Koala. The most distinct characterization in Space Cadet ties back to the fiber of Guardian Bot's character. Upon Celeste's absence, a paint kit is delivered to Guardian Bot's door for him to play around with. For the rest of the film, slice-of-life moments of Guardian Bot's daily activity are interspliced with Celeste's space travels. Guardian Bot kills time watering plants in the garden, toying around with a paint kit, going to the grocery to get objects to paint, and going outside to fetch his fuel for Bocha. It all seemed quaint, and I found a further interest in his antics during my third screening, but sometimes it would feel a bit too long. The only reason I found the scenes with Celeste to be far more engaging were that they incorporated higher situational stakes and moments of action. With Guardian Bot's inner conflict, I noticed that it was difficult for the creative team to get as many interesting things to do with a character that would live up to Celeste's space trek. That was all by intention, however. Guardian Bot is innately a home robot, and had assumed a very simple way of living throughout his time with Celeste. This progression should make sense for his character, but it doesn't nearly feel as exciting when you watch the film. When his life's mission is distant from him, what would be more situationally interesting and comedic than just finding objects to paint? I loved the physical comedy that was introduced with this character, and felt the way his character was handled after slowed down the film's pacing. What if there was more of it? The metaphor that Kid Koala devised for this character was very clever. It's a genuine double entendre with many aspects that could be taken both literally and symbolically given the futuristic setting. It's of a nostalgic caretaker who wishes to continue their life supporting the one that matters to them the most. Someone who can't help but hold on to their memories. Memories, or in Guardian Bot's case, save files, are all that he has left before the end of his life. His livelihood. It's a somewhat existential topic to handle, and the prospect was an endearing feat, especially because Guardian Bot characterizes a common familial figure I could see my own grandpa within. I'm fond of the idea of using Guardian Bot's playback function to intersplice cinematic flashbacks that further contextualize both of the characters' lives and show more about who they are. I feel like the film's moments with Guardian Bot are the sweetest when we see the flashbacks of these characters together. Those moments are the most grounded and appealing sequences of the film and establish its familial and tad emotional backbone. When the characters are together in general, we see the characters come to life and take from each other, ultimately learning how to live along the way. The similarities of body language between Celeste and Guardian Bot is another familial aspect, and a great element the animators had paid attention to. It's really fun to see them play off each other. The gradual reduction of Guardian Bot's short-term cognitive functions could be compared to dementia. The overall metaphor of his character is a wonderful analogy for the youth within the audience who aren't familiar with someone who's faced a situation like that beforehand. Guardian Bot's most important memories begin to take most of his storage to where he entirely loses place of where he is. It's saddening to see this character so separated from the fabric of reality, to where some of his memories become a fantastical, hodgepodge generation. It's easy to uphold the suspension of disbelief with the timely increase of generated imagery. Again goes that double entendre of a robotic caretaker, go figure. In a narrative like Space Cadet, finding a replacement storage disk would be a rather apathetic resolution for this crafted character. When I was watching his character unfold in the cinema, I was reminded of the 2018 animated film Next Gen. It had a robot character who questioned the longevity of his existence, and had similar storage problems like Guardian Bot, but at a much higher stake. Project 77 went from a military robot to a buddy for a teenage rebel, so there was a stronger tension in whether to keep the memories or keep the instinctual function. For Guardian Bot, this conflict seems much more grounded in realism. In a more symbolic sense, memories last, and it's the end of the road. We have to value the time we have with our elders. We'll never know when they'll be gone. When I was reviewing the film information, one aspect about Space Cadet that stood out the most was its choice to omit the use of dialogue. I was especially curious by how and why the creative team embarked on such a feat, and how it would end up influencing the film. Initially, I was in immense support for the motion, as I thought back to the 2024 animated masterwork Flow, but that picture was super distinct and it spent its time on animal characters with a familiar code and behavior, so Space Cadet was sure to be different. Kid Koala decided on making the film free of dialogue after thinking back to his grandmother again. She couldn't understand any English, so the family would put on the silent comedy films of Charlie Chaplin. Kid Koala recalls that this was the most he'd heard her laugh from a moving picture. As a further testament to his grandmother, and to make the film more accessible to a global audience, it was decided that dialogue was to be completely omitted from the film. When I saw Space Cadet for the first time, I actually became confused by the gesture before I heard Kid Koala's reasoning. The use of language was actually inconsistent throughout the film. If you were to remove dialogue entirely, also remove the references to language on store signs and spaceship holograms to commit to that consistency. Instead of readable text, use blocky graphics that resemble text but make sense for the film's world and visual style. Does the city in which the film takes place use garbled murmurs as its common language? How could that be conveyed through signage? A journalist exiting my screening directly told Kid Koala that his film was the next Flow, in context that it also showed the year prior, and I winced. There's much more to earning that title than simply being devoid of dialogue. The effort to pace a film without dialogue is admirable, and I don't discount all that ended up in the final film, but I have very mixed feelings with how the film was paced and how it contributed to my overall viewing experience. I've made it clear that I'm very happy with the physicality of the lead characters and believe the soulful character animation should be celebrated. It carried a lot of aspects about the film. There are those universal gestures everyone can recognize, like the use of onomatopoeia, the small wordless sounds that the characters make in their gestures. Through the omission of dialogue, the creative team had to resort to other ways of telling their story, and I believe the film is at its strongest in soundtrack and sound design. I'm most concerned with the consistency of the film's pacing. Some of the jokes are timed improperly, and I wouldn't know when to laugh at times with its lengthier jokes. Some of the moments feel longer than need be. Here, they added one final bit to the joke that lacked the duration to where the moment's already lost. The small narrative tidbits take a rewatch to pay more notice to, like when Guardian Bot mistakenly leaves his bag of battery fuel on the ground, and doesn't spend a moment to flinch further about his degrading memory before quickly getting transported back to a previous memory of his. It's a bit rushed. Other moments feel fruitless, like this one sequence when Guardian bought his painting. He takes a moment to study how he could etch off marks of his wet coat of paint to unveil the dry area underneath, but the moment feels wasted as it suddenly succeeds to the next, nor is it brought up again afterwards. It came across to me like a last-minute reference to how Kid Koala had illustrated the original graphic novel using similar scratchboards. If you were to pursue a no-dialogue cinematic project, at least commit to an attentive and consistent pacing without making me question things and lose the immersion in the viewing experience. In a film without dialogue, the soundtrack to Space Cadet is its most important signal of life. I mentioned that the film was directed by Kid Koala. Isn't that a cool name? You might recognize him for his work as a scratch DJ and record producer, and having listened to much of his vast musical catalog after my film screening, I can hear why he's so renowned. He puts all of his emphasis on small technological details and ambience through his musical style. The tracks incorporate samples and ad-libs that would not have been considered to blend well in traditional methods of composition. There was this video of him remixing Moon River with 2 records for the accompaniment and vocals. Hearing him scratch them so quickly and on a staggered beat, and hearing how the whole melody was still congruent deeply fascinated me. His method is so unique compared to other DJs I've heard of, and was really proficient and hands-on. He has a very skilled musical ear. I want you all to be familiar with his style of music. Here, take a listen. Art can come in many different styles and forms, right? With all that in mind, it's no surprise that he was also responsible for composing the underlying soundtrack for his original multimedia Space Cadet iteration in 2011. When creating the original graphic novel, he composed a still picture soundtrack to accompany the events in each sequence, and fittingly, reused a handful of those tracks in the feature film in a polished remaster for the theatrical auditorium. To prepare for my screening, I did some research on the existing graphic novel and listened to the soundtrack to give me a feel of the sound. Along with the original soundtrack, Kid Koala composed an additional assortment of tracks that befit the cinematic medium for the 2025 film. They further grounded the sequences and gave them a set tempo. I believe Kid Koala's beforehand experience in music had allowed him to make an animation soundtrack unique and unfamiliar to those I've heard previously. In the original soundtrack, there are so many elements of diegetic audio, like record scratches, sirens, and vinyl static, and technical syncopated chirps or pulsating lo-fi synths. The sounds bring a further life to the character's setting, the direness of the circumstances, as well as a stronger narrative connection. The newer bites of soundtrack in the score to the film, as well as the most pivotal tracks of the original, delve deeper in the orchestral. The pianos, string compositions by Vid Cousins, and the occasional brass that provide the underlying bass of the more extreme moments in song. Regarding Kid Koala's overall discography, Space Cadet was one of his first forays in ambient music, and the original 2011 soundtrack had soon become one of my favorites in how it created a distinct combination of orchestral and abstract methods of compositions. Yet throughout the fare of Space Cadet, the majority of his soundtrack assumes a bittersweet mood, a homebody comfort with your family contrasted to the dreaded silence and grief from loss. His approach to supporting this narrative through a more subdued lens effectively brings more attention to the narrative nuance that the film tries to tackle. The tempo is slow and has a fluctuating pace through ritardando. The more sentimental tracks lengthen the picture edit and add that necessary breathing space to let you sit with these characters. The technical jargon is almost like its own living being with how detached it is from the organic instruments. It's as if the sounds originate from Guardian Bot's deteriorating body. Cardboard Stars, Seashells, and Birthday are two tracks from Space Cadet I really admire, and they both resemble very reflective and conclusive tracks. The most traditional of the original soundtrack, the two tracks are hand in hand with each other, and mark the characters' most major turning points every time they're cued in the film. The ending note in the former is so cathartic and beautiful. The most epic and compelling tracks of the new soundtrack took me by much surprise and were unlike anything I've heard in the original soundtrack. They were an incredible deviation from Kid Koala's established fare. There was a certain narrative beat that the film built towards so perfectly, and it felt very earned through how it unraveled its tension and its exciting musical cue, on top of the scene being so technologically intensive in visuals. It was the peak of this massive leviathan that was about to thrust you down its rush of adrenaline. You really feel like you're accompanying this character sharply soaring through the air, out of How to Train Your Dragon or The Wild Robot. The orchestra ramps up, and more heroic brass instruments are introduced, in addition to staccato strings and electric guitar. When you hear it in the cinema, it's the loudest point of the entire film. The music takes its full frame and roars its prowess. This blessed cacophony was relatively unknown to the rest of the film, which made the scene really stand out. In actuality, the musical group comprised Kid Koala's self-taught friends and family, which made that particular emotional beat miles more personal. In addition to the remastered and newer score pieces, numerous original songs were written for the film by Kid Koala, and some tracks were written by Karen O and rapper Ladybug Mecha respectively. Many existing jazz and R&B compositions were featured, including Moon River, Fly Me to the Moon, and They Can't Take That Away From Me. Songs of the like had greatly comprised Kid Koala's personal childhood influences and personalized the film further, in addition to their subject matter greatly tying into the dual themes of character relations and celestial being. The musical tone and voice also befit the film, and I greatly enjoyed listening to them. Two vocalists, Emiliana Torini and Trixie Whitley, had collaborated with Kid Koala before for his Music to Draw To series of albums, so I'd been familiar with their voices before Space Cadet. Torini softly vocalizes Guardian Bot's sorrow and reflects the simplicity of this work. The vocal processing itself was so compressed and shied away. Ladybug Mecha was brought onto a few songs, and she was fun to follow around in the track Rise, for which she co-wrote. She just exudes this natural confidence and straightforward presentation. She sang for Fly Me to the Moon, and that was an adorable cover. I got to hear the softer side of her vocals complement the character relations on screen befittingly. Megan Smith in Paper Doll lightly and poignantly vocalizes this parental connection between Guardian Bot and Celeste, and I found her personally satisfying. Martha Wainwright the same for They Can't Take That Away From Me, though a lot more let loose and yet so soothing. Through the original songs in the film, I discovered that Kid Koala was actually a really succinct lyricist as well. The more I find out about him, the more impressed I am. I'm very glad Tiff introduced me to his works. He was able to encapsulate these timely feelings and experiences into astute narrative text that shape-shifted according to instance. The lyrics were very resonant and complementary to the surrounding accompaniment. With the soundtrack alone, Kid Koala has proved that he's cultivated a truly cinematic lifeform for Space Cadet, yet it feels much more expeditious than the work it supports. I'm face to face with a deep melancholy and an instilled curiosity if the world was larger than our minuscule planetary system, and that we're just one piece of a larger picture. I feel lonely and somewhat nostalgic. The soundtrack surpasses the simplicity of this film, and it feels more befit with something much more complex in presentation, which makes it more frustrating that the emotional quality of the film hadn't moved me tremendously. This topic extends to how I feel about my first impressions towards the film, and why I felt let down after my September screening. When I listened to the original soundtrack before I watched this film, I noted that it painted a much darker and melancholy mood of the story through the white on black scratchboard visuals and subdued, sparse musical accompaniment. In a way, it resembled the picture book In the Treehouse, albeit textless and in complete grayscale. Suffice it to say, I thought the film would delve into further narrative complexity and more poignant memorability as suggested through the mood of the graphic novel. It felt rather depressing to look at compared to the vibrancy of the film, as it was devoid of any color and largely inverted the use of exposure. The film only contained a handful of this necessary melancholy that would round the film further and liven its emotional balance vastly. Part of me was disappointed by how simple the narrative actually wound up being, and that just told me that you can't always tell the tone of a story from its first impression. There's a very clear difference when creating a soundtrack for a graphic novel and for a film, and that's no difference for the case of Space Cadet. Within the textless still picture, the soundtrack still enables the reader to read at a pace comfortable for them, but it also encourages and guides them to further discern the emotional integrity and intention. Within the film, the soundtrack either defines or supports the established pace that unfolds in front of the viewer. Kid Koala's art style by itself is simple and lively. It all appears as a flimsy yet very intentional image. I'm reminded of animator Don Hertzfeldt, who prioritized visual simplicity and attention to messaging in his work. Within the original Space Cadet novel, the scratches of line art paired with Kid Koala's intricate cross-hatching feels like a grand elaboration of a child's vision. I personally loved the film much more than the graphic novel on account that it was finished as immersive and easy to follow along as it was. The visual style of Space Cadet is one of my favorite elements of this film, and it was a joint effort between Kid Koala, head of story Lillian Chan, art director Corinne Morel, and CG supervisor Francois Boudry. Morel was the art director on The Little Prince, which explains the similarities in character design and in the beaded eyes, but I most definitely felt the impact of Lillian Chan. It's astounding to see how she adapted and interpreted the original work and made it a lot more grounded and unified. The bubbliness in young Céleste, the cute recklessness of the space jellyfish, and the mischievous cat were all thanks to her input. The visual cohesion of the film carries the same feeling as in Kid Koala's own art style, a collective homage to childlike imagination made true. Through the visuals, I can't help but be transported back into my own childhood when I made my own worlds. That's why the art style is so simple. It doesn't necessarily look crude for that matter, it's rather endearing. The character animations were superb examples of controlled stepped animation, exaggeration and posing, and subtle squash and stretch. I love the primitive design language and the sculpted, textile feel to the world, as if the film was entirely created with stop-motion techniques. The film uses simplicity to its astute benefit, even using flat graphics for sets that are far away. The flat shades of the city and the grid layout remind me of the city within the 2025 film iteration of Dogman. The desaturation and flatness of the city contrast greatly with the vibrant beachway and luminous system. The city resembles the streets of Production City, Montreal, which I thought was a nice callback. The alien planets were all very distinct from one another and visually interesting to look at, in part because of the film's distinctive color script. The most vibrant and neon colors liven the new atmospheres and spark some interest. Throughout each sequence, there's an established distinction between the colors of the characters and the vibrant colors of the surrounding atmosphere. Aside from the dynamic exposure when need be, the colors don't leak into one another, and it was all very aesthetically pleasing. Space Cadet also features a prominent motif of folding origami, and I thought that inclusion was very charming. The two characters are so invested over the DIY craft, however simple or complex the piece winds up being. It's so fun and builds their strong bond. I don't see origami much like that in modern animated films. As much as I was particularly disappointed that the film held back from extending its emotional reach, I'm so grateful for the wonders in the final film. I'm happy an all-Canadian animated project was able to be funded and campaigned, and I'm incredibly proud of the creative team for fulfilling the completion with a large patience. Wherever the film goes next, I hope it's accessible around your theater. Space Cadet is very deserving of a general watch. The efforts in messaging, communication, and spectacle are worth discussing for sure. To Kid Koala and the rest of the creative team, congratulations on releasing the film widely, and good luck on your future projects. My name is Swag Broski, and here's to reviewing the newest animated film.